Hi everyone. Today we're going to go over how to install the SFK External Heating Switch to existing V3.5 kits, 300 HP batteries, or any other device that's using the SFK 200 BMS. To do this upgrade, you're going to need some basic tools. You'll have to have the SFK External Switch, some clips to cut wires, a lug pack which comes with the switch. You'll need either a 3/4 or 7/8 hole saw. If using impact driver, you'll also need some driver bits to remove the bolts from your lid. You'll need electrical tape. You'll need a ratchet or some sort of means to connect the lugs. Paper towels, isopropyl alcohol, either an impact driver or a drill to actually cut the circular hole needed to install the switch. Okay, so we'll prepare the switch next and show you that process. All right, so looking on our switch, we'll see there's a few wires. So the first thing we're going to do is we're actually going to cut the XT30 plug as well as this red wire. These are the only three wires that we're going to cut, and we'll then prepare them to show you how we mount them. And this is needed because normally this is sort of done to where it can be installed in a switch that does not have a heating port. But since we do have a heating port in the 200, we want to prepare the switch so that it will still allow the standard switch auto failsafe for heating. So even if the switch is off, the BMS will still turn the heating pads on at low temperature for low temperature charging. Okay. All right, so we just cut this. Now we've got two red wires and a black wire. And what we're going to do is we're going to attach this lug and combine these two red wires. And then for the black wire, we're going to attach it here. And what we're going to do is basically remove about 1/4 inch of wire, secure it, attach the lug, crimp it, and do the same thing for that. We've prepared the switch. As you can see, both red wires are going into this yellow lug, and the black wire is now going into its separate lug. So this is how it was originally. We cut those off, we combine the two red wires, and we combine the black wire. And now our switch is ready to install to existing HP 300 or SFK 3.5 kit that's using the 200 BMS. All right, so today we're going to be using this battery 300 HP as an example. As you can see, it does not have the external switch, but so the way that the heating works is when you have low temperature and you're trying to charge it, it will heat up the battery, but once the battery is at temperature, it will not. But the heating only turns on when you're heating. So what the external switch is going to allow us to do is manually control the heating pads so that if you want to just keep the battery warm at idle, we can. So the first thing we're going to do is remove these 4 bolts and take off the lid. All right, so with the lid off, we will now remove the bolts on the side, and once we disconnect them, we'll do one at a time, but we'll wrap the bolts up in electrical tape. Very important, do not do this. You don't want these terminals swinging around. Make sure to secure them, and whichever tool that you use to take those bolts off, just take your time with it. It will come off, and just attach this tape to it once you have it off, and then we can begin taking the lid completely off and doing the changes that we need to in order to install the switch. All right, so as you can see, we've taken the bolts off, we've taken that, and we've attached electrical tape to make sure that it doesn't conduct. Now, you can optionally take this off, but we don't recommend you disconnecting the battery BMS because you will lose some settings, especially on the pre-built battery. So it's best to keep this connected and just wrap these with electrical tape. They should keep the battery isolated so there's no chance of an arc. But now we have taken the lid off and we can begin doing this process to prepare this so that we can install the external switch. So that's going to be coming up next. So now with the lid off, you're going to mark approximately halfway between the last square on the inside of the lid and about 3/4 inch from that side, and just kind of roughly draw around where the two lines meet, and that's going to be the point that you will use for your circular saw. You don't have to be exactly precise, but you want to kind of keep it as close to the center as you can, as this is going to let you know where you're going to install the switch so that you have a place to run the wires. Okay, so the next thing we're going to do is we are going to actually attach our hole saw to our impact driver and drill through the lid. All right, so we just finished drilling the hole. We're using our 7/8 inch hole saw. And now we're going to take a utility knife and just kind of get rid of any of the burrs left over to clean that off. And then we'll flip the lid side over and clean it with isopropyl alcohol, and then we'll install the switch. So just use this over here to sort of clean out any of the little burrs left over so you have a nice smooth surface. Now you're going to take your isopropyl alcohol, put it on some paper towels, and just sort of clean the area. You want a nice clean surface so that the switch adhesive side has a nice clean surface to bond. Optionally, if you want to really smooth it out, you can go in and use some also around 300 to 400 grit sandpaper and kind of scuff up this area so it's going to have a very nice clean thing. Not really required, it will work, but if you feel that you want to kind of smooth it out, go ahead and do that now so that you have a nice clean area. And next we'll begin installing the switch. Onto the switch install. Now you'll notice that this is silicone, but it's specially treated on the back. Normally it's next to impossible to get silicone to stick to anything, but this surface has been prepared so that it has an adhesive surface. Now you will slowly peel off this sort of area. Be very careful. And what that's going to do is reveal the adhesive portion. So we're going to roughly position it around here and have it installed so that the wires go through and we have it positioned properly, which will basically let these wires come through on the inside of the lid, which then we'll secure using those bracket securing squares. And after that is done, we will be able to activate our heating pads with our switch, which gives us full manual control of the heating system. All right, so we'll do that next. All right, now with the switch installed, you want to press down in here, make sure you have a nice solid contact with the lid. This should basically provide you with essentially a watertight seal. This is silicone, and you've got approximately 1/2 inch of adhesion all the way around. So just make sure you press it in nice and tight. And for the most part, this is not going to go anywhere. It takes considerable amount of force to remove this. If for whatever reason you do remove this, we can send you another one. There obviously will be a charge for it, but it won't be the end of the world. However, that's essentially it for the. So now essentially is how to route these wires so that they stay in place and don't sort of flop around. For that, we include about 10 or so of these little cable securing squares, and they've got like a little area where you can insert the wire to. And this is just going to kind of organize it so that's easier to install the lid. So we're just going to show you the way we do it. You can change it up for whatever your preference is. It's entirely up to you. One thing to note, this is the temperature probe of the switch itself. We normally prefer getting the ambient temperature of the air around the case, so we normally mount it here, but you could very well mount it directly onto your cells. But just be aware, depending on where you mount this can change how the regulation of the heating is going to work with your internal heating pads, because the sensor on the switch will be based on whatever reading it's coming from here. All right. Okay, so we've sort of secured our wires in place. The only one we didn't really tie down is this one, because this is actually going to connect to the BMS port and share it with the other lug that's already on there. But for our main temperature probe, we just kind of here, and it's sort of just in the air, and that's going to measure ambient temperature of the case as a whole, which is just the preference that we normally do. Of course, you can route it wherever. The black wire is sort of hovering on top of the black lug, and the two red wires are hovering a little bit over sort of the red lug. So when we install it, what's going to happen is there'll be two wires connected to the main red lug and one wire connected to the black lug. And this is going to connect to the heating port on the BMS. So now let's go ahead and install our modified and upgraded lid on back to our battery and see how that looks like. All right, so now we have everything sort of secured, and let's just kind of go over what we've done. As you can see, the red side now has two lugs, the original heating pad wire and our new external switch wire. But keep in mind, the lug is on the bottom and these two separate bolts are on top. It's very important. If you don't do it this way, your main lug is not going to have good contact with the terminal, which can cause some issues. So make sure that these two sit on top of the main lug, which it doesn't really matter if this one's on top or that one's on top, but as long as the main lug is on the bottom touching the main brass insert of the case. So that's how that one is set up. Now let's look at the black one. Same way. The main lug is the one that's touching the brass insert of the lid, and the small black terminal sits on top, and we've secured it. Then if we look here, we now have two wires. One was that black wire that came off the switch, is now connected to here. So what does all this mean? This means even if your switch is off, the BMS's normal functionality, where it will turn on heating when charging in low temperatures, will still remain intact. It will still function the way it was. You get that exact same way as if you didn't have that switch. But now, if you wanted to warm the battery up, even when you're not charging or if it's just idling, the switch will let you do that. So essentially, you have two methods to drive the heating pads within your battery. So now we're going to go ahead and button it up, install the lids back, the bolts back on the lid, and let's see what we get. All right, now with the lid installed and the switch installed, you can see it looks very nice, as if it was always meant to be. Verify the switch functionality, press and hold. Mode 1 turns on, which is your eco mode. That's basically going to kind of keep the internal temperature around 65 to 68 degrees. Plenty of good for 99% of the cases. However, if you want a little warmer, you can go to mode 2. That's going to raise the internal temperature to where it's around 70 to 75 degrees. Only needed for extreme cold, where you just need a warmer temperature. Now, there is mode 3, which we normally recommend you not use. As a matter of fact, the only time you should be using mode 3 is if you almost just want to discharge your battery. And we'll show that to you in a second. So mode 3 is going to raise the internal temperature anywhere from about 86 to about 90 degrees. So if you want to really get the maximum performance of your battery, mode 3 is going to get your battery to peak temperature, so that if you just want to burst, see how much you can burst, you can use that. But understand, this is going to drain your battery quite significantly. Normally should not be used. Then mode 4 and 5 are two timer modes. They'll raise the temperature to about 70 degrees. 4 will basically disable the heating after 12 hours. And mode 5 will disable the heating after 24 hours. So like I said, for most people, just leave it on 1. You can leave it on 1 for the entire season. Depending on how cold it is, you're probably going to use about anywhere from 4 to 5 amp hours per night, and maybe about 10 or so amp hours throughout the entire day, depending on how cold it is. So as long as you have a little bit of solar coming in, the batteries will stay nice and warm in their optimal temperature. So that is it, and let's just sort of see how many amp draws we have now that we have connected to see what we have for different modes. It's pretty warm in here, so I don't really think mode 1 and 2 are going to do anything, but we'll show you in a preview with version 5 of our app, see how it looks like. All right, so we have the app. By the way, this is version 5 of the app, and the GUI is being sort of redesigned. It's still a work in progress, but I think you're going to like it. We are not going to be showing any sort of BMS warnings in the bottom, and also let you know what we have. So this is just sort of a preview. But if you can see mode 1, it's not really going to do anything. The BMS is already at 78 degrees, so it's above the temperature, doesn't really do anything. Mode 2, it probably is not going to do anything either, because it's right. Oh, it is. So we can see in mode 2, we are discharging and we're drawing about 9 amps. So it is actually going to head and draw a little bit to raise the temperature up to, I would say, about somewhere in the neighborhood of 80 or so degrees. So it will run until you reach that point. And mode 3 is the same way. It's going to be drawing a little bit of power. So to get it to get to the right temperature, it will run. But if we go to mode 4, Again, it's a little high, but if we go back to mode 1, eco mode, right here, you can see we're in standby. It'll sort of stay there. So for a majority of people, eco mode is what you're going to want to stay in. It's going to keep the battery there. But the other modes are there depending on what you're wanting to do. And like I say, I only really ever use mode 3 is if I just need to discharge my battery or it's at a high state of charge and I want to bring it down a little bit. I'll run it under mode 3, and it's gonna draw about almost 10 amps per hour. So you let it run for about once it gets to 95 degrees, it'll stop. But that is sort of how that works. Now, one very important thing, a lot of people have said, what if this malfunctions and keeps warming the battery? Yes, not to worry. You have 2 temperature probes inside the BMS. If this thing goes berserk and just doesn't shut off and keeps warming, once the internal temperature raises to about 130 degrees Fahrenheit or right around 40 something degrees Celsius, the BMS itself will shut off. So there's no chance that you will have a runaway switch that goes berserk and just keeps running. The BMS itself will shut off because they'll detect the temperature of the battery getting too high, and that will basically cut off power to this. Now, that basically means you have 4 possible temperature probes, and very unlikely you have a quadruple failure at the same time. So you should be good to go. This is a fairly easy mod. If you are looking to buying one of these with this pre-installed, simply select the external switch option when buying the SFK 300, and this will come pre-installed from us so that you will basically have this functionality right out of the box. All right, well, thank you very much, and if you have any questions, feel free to reach out to us. We'll be more than happy to help.